Lucy Neville is Climate Officer with Museums Galleries Scotland and has a background in environmental education and lifelong learning through museum collections. And I must say, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Lucy about such an important topic. Obviously, the climate crisis is something that affects us all, and I'm sure there'll be lessons we can all apply in our organisations. And now over to Lucy.
Thank you so much, David. It's lovely to be here. Thank you. I'm just gonna fill up my notes to make sure I don't go off topic too much, which I do have a habit of doing. That now means I can't see any of you. So if you do need my attention, David, Hannah, you have permission to just shout at me through my earphones. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucy Neville. I'm the Climate Officer for Museums Galleries Scotland, as David said. As a quick visual description, I'm a white woman with curly brown hair up in a bun, glasses, and dangly earrings. So the climate crisis and working around climate can often feel really scary. Like there's a lot of stats and science to get your head around, and how do we approach audiences? And sometimes it can all just feel a little bit much. So to ease us in today, I would like to tell you a story, if that's okay. Bear with me, there is a point to me starting my session with a story. It's a story that I was told always at this time of year growing up. And as with all good stories, there's a lot of versions, so you might know a version of it yourself. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, you've got a cup of tea if you want one, and I'll begin. Just before Samhain, Wren began to worry about the arrival of the cold. He was the smallest of the birds, and he knew that with the harvest over, he'd have fewer warm places to shelter and less to eat. He flew to great old oak and asked for shelter among the huge leaves. But oak said, "No, you cannot shelter. What if you wanted, to eat all my acorns? No, you cannot. You cannot shelter." Wren sighed and flew to Rowan and asked again, "Please, can I shelter?" "Goodness, no. You eat all my berries, and they are needed by the waxwings and to keep the spirits at bay." Wren was getting concerned at this point. Oh. So next he flew to Aspen. "Afraid not, wee one. All my trees are actually one, and if you take the heat from one of us, you take the heat from all the aspen of the forest. So no." Wren began to shiver. The days were getting shorter, and the sun held less warmth with each passing hour. Then he heard Granny Pine. "Wee one, you can shelter in my branches. My leaves are only wee needles, without much warmth, but you're welcome. And my cones and rough bark are home to many beasties, which you can eat." Wren was so grateful. He used his great voice. Despite his tiny size, he had the loudest voice of the forest, and praised thanks to Granny Pine. All, including Mother Nature, heard his praise. Mother Nature held Wren in the highest regard, for he was the king of the birds and the symbol of spring and renewal. She was horrified at how the other trees had not respected him as such. In a hoolie of wind, she roared, "Trees of my forest, you have been selfish. You have not cared for the smallest amongst us, and you underestimate the power that the small things have. As punishment, you shall all lose your leaves every Samhain. You must shiver with cold until Wren announces it is spring. Granny Pine, for your kindness, you may keep all your needles year round, and I shall make your cones rich with sap and nutrients so that the birds spread them far and wide." And so it came to be that the trees, all other than pine, lose their leaves every year. So I hope you enjoyed a wee story. Thank you for indulging me. I love stories as a way to engage with and learn about climate and remind ourselves that protecting and understanding our land and our seascape is not something new. It runs really deep in every culture. Sometimes we just need to search a little bit to find it. So before we properly get into topics today, I would just like us to start with a quick group agreement. Climate can sometimes be a difficult topic, and so I'd like us all to feel safe in today's conversation and confident in sharing stories today. These are some of our kind of standard sharing practices at MGS, but please do feel free if you have others that you'd like, pop them in the chat. I ask that we're all respectful of each other's opinions and situations. They will all be different. It's okay to feel challenged by this topic. Climate action is very overwhelming at times. That's all right. Take a break if you need a break. Let each other talk. If you feel like it's kind of just been your voice that's been heard in the chats, maybe take a step back. If you don't normally share your voice, maybe challenge yourself today, even just to put something in the chat. And finally, that sharing beyond this meeting today is protected. If you're sharing something with us all that you're happy for us to use and talk about with colleagues, then you can let us know. Otherwise, what we talk about in this space stays in this space for those who are both here and who are watching the recording. Okay, so let's actually get started. Enough of my waffling. A quick little bit about what I do and why, and then we'll kind of get into working together a little bit more. The climate crisis is a challenge that faces all of us. And at Museums Galleries Scotland, we're committed to doing what we can and supporting the sector in doing the same. This year, we signed up to Culture Declares Emergency. And in 2023, we put climate crisis at the heart of our new national strategy for Scotland's museums and galleries. Pretty much everything we're going to chat about today is relevant UK-wide though, and I am interested in what's happening in all of the home nations, not just here in Scotland. Climate connects to everything we do. It's not just our heating systems and our natural history collections. Museums Galleries Scotland have a selection of climate resources, guides and networks, and I'll share links to those and we can chat about it more in the Q&A later if you want as well. So, why museums? And I'd really like your thoughts on this. So if everyone is okay to do so, if you would like to pop in the chat why you think museums are the perfect place to talk about climate. Absolutely, Olivia. We are one of the few trusted voices still left. Kind of trusted experts are increasingly rare, and museums still hold that space. Lovely. Any more for any more? Yeah, museums look at the past, the present, and the future. Absolutely, Irene. We've got that really good overview. We're safe spaces. People expect to learn something, and we can use our collections to interpret. Absolutely, Sue. Thank you. Culture, heritage, and the environment, the trusted institution. Absolutely, Adrian. What else have we got? Alex, yes, objects to tell stories. Definitely. I love telling stories. A lot of our activities are built around engaging with the environment. Definitely built, natural, and socioeconomic. So we're the perfect platform. Fabulous. Okay, I will let you all keep putting in there. But that is pretty much, excitingly, exactly what my next slide says. We have huge amounts of historical data about the weather, biodiversity, connection with the land. We are trusted voices. We have, oh, I've lost my slides, bear with. We have wide and varied audiences. We're centres within our communities. We are also centres of intangible cultural heritage as well as the material. We bring the global into focus through local understanding. And most important of all, we're storytellers. So museums can inspire people to make connections, challenge their understanding, and think. I think we all know that, right? That's why we love the sector we're in. But there's lots we consider about climate. Our buildings and sites come in all different sizes, and that varies our emissions as well. Types of energy sources that we're using. Are we able to insulate our buildings? Particularly tricky with more historic ones. The local planning bylaws impact our ability to install renewables or make upgrades and retrofit. I am so open to all of these questions, all of these barriers, and how we can chat about overcoming them. And we'll have a little bit of chance later on to kind of talk about this as a group as well. But for me, climate is so much more than just emissions as individual museums or organisations. It's about our influence and our impact upon the entirety of society. That's where our real potential lies. So in Scotland alone, there are an estimated 12 million museum visits a year, which is not too shabby for a nation with a population of only 5.5 million. Museums can help the public fall in love with nature, find connection again with the land and the sea, and begin to understand our roles in individual and systematic change. Outdoor education, gardening and well-being, even folklore and stories can help us connect our cultural connections to landscape and nature. All of this is climate. The reason I began with a story today is because it doesn't always feel like that harsh being greeted with graphs and stats and having to understand complex political issues. The story that I told today is one I grew up with. I think my mum first told it to me when I was about 2, but it teaches us about the size, the call, and the diets of a specific bird local to us. It teaches about the properties of some of the most common trees in our forest. It teaches us the natural timings for seasonal change, and it teaches us the importance of respecting the smallest things in nature, working in harmony together, and protecting ourselves in doing so. Understanding and showcasing the role of colonialism is also really important in climate work. Colonialism played a role in introducing invasive species to a lot of ecosystems, in the destruction of biodiversity of many places, and in the devaluing of Indigenous knowledge, which taught balance with nature. So all of that work, any colonial work you're doing, that's climate too. We can build climate awareness and action into all of our work as a sector. Climate doesn't have to be something new. It doesn't have to be yet another thing to try and cover with our rising costs and our stretched capacity. I guarantee you climate is already fitting with the stuff that you're covering. It's just about tweaking perspective. So with that in mind, don't want today to just be me talking at you all. I think it's much more impactful if we have conversations. So I would love to hear, and I'll turn off my slides. Feel free to turn on your camera or pop in the chat. What are folk working on at the moment? Everyone and every organization will be in a different stage, will be doing tiny things or huge things, and that's all absolutely okay. So, what are folk working on? And hopefully you can all see each other now and not my slides. Caroline, yeah, go for it. Kick us off.
Hello. Thanks very much for hosting that talk. That's fascinating. That resonates a lot with what I'm trying to work on. So I work mainly with archaeology and archaeological collections or museums and sites and things like that. Everything climate seems to be very connected, at least to me, simply because we always have very specific questions from the public. For example, nowadays, how can we live without that much plastic? Well, if we look at what existed before it existed, etc., etc., we can find inspiration or maybe solutions for a more sustainable future. I specifically worked on building and construction. That's why I'm very interested in Glencoe as well. It's such an opportunity to have rural museums, ideally open-air museums, to potentially be able to offer training courses or hands-on activities related to how people used to build their houses, their sheds, making natural paint, for example, in the past, and how that can be implemented for very cheap, very simple solutions, very natural and based on local materials for a modern retrofit house, especially, or in Scotland for, well, natural solutions to repairs, maintenance, or building and construction, especially with earth building that we don't usually associate with wet-ish and dampish climate around here, which exists still. So that's what I'm mainly trying to do, looking at archaeology, traditional construction methods in different places, learning them, and then being able to teach them to people. But I think that all of your sites and museums, be it open or just a site to visit, are the best place to run these kind of things, because people visiting are already so open to learning anything about it. That's me.
I love that. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, and you're right. Archaeology is such a great place to start talking about this. In terms of what we find and what we can learn about the past through that, and like middens are one of my favorite things because they show us, just how little was left, how much everything was used. One of my favorite objects in my old role when I was in a museum was a Viking ice skate, which is a bit of a cow bone, super polished, so it would glide across the ice. And I just love that because it's like everything is used. Um, it's also worth Vindolanda have done some really interesting research recently around how long we've got to actually excavate in terms of archaeology left, as soil pHs are starting to shift with the climate crisis. Organic materials, so kind of leathers and things, it's estimated we might have less than 50 years left to get them out of the ground, which is terrifying. Specifically, I mean, that's specific to that region, but I suspect it's similar elsewhere. So yeah, I think there's loads of space for that in archaeology as well. And you're right, yeah, building materials that's a whole other area with so much interesting stuff. I love it. Yeah, I'd love to see like thatching courses in museums and that kind of thing as well. Yeah, amazing. Kathy, I think you were next, and then Sue, you're after.
Hi, everybody. And thanks, Caroline. That was really interesting. It'd be great to get you to talk to people in Climate Museum UK. I don't know if you've all heard of Climate Museum UK. The founder, Bridget, lives in Norwich, and I do a lot of work with her as well. So check that out. Sorry if this is going to sound a bit like sort of advertising, but it's an opportunity for me. So I put in the chat about a GEM course, which I'm running in January. And part of that, so that's a 5-part course all about responsible, environmentally responsible. We use that phrase because that's what Arts Council call it, learning practice. And part of that will be a new version of the Carbon Literacy Museums course, especially for public engagement. So that will then also be available as a standalone thing after that, which I've just got to do the final tweaks for. Well, I've sent the final tweaks in and it will be accredited very soon. So yeah, and GEM, as well as that GEM conference, GEM course, the GEM conference, which is every year in September, the one coming up in September in Leeds, will be very heavily all around environmental stuff. So watch out for that. If you don't normally come to the GEM conference, or if you do, it'd be great to see you there. It's the second week in September. It'll soon be on the GEM website. So I just wanted to make sure everybody got all that information. But yeah,
great.
thank you very much. It's fantastic to come and I also put in the chat about the archers. AI meets rewilding. It's absolutely amazing episode. So if you don't know, in the Archers, it's set in a rural Midlands, kind of West Midlands ish, and they've been doing rewilding for ages. But the villain landlord is potentially about to kick them off the land, and they've made this amazing app that will take people around and talk about what might happen in the future if they don't do rewilding. It's absolutely amazing. So anyway, it was really interesting because the course I was running before had just said, someone from Historic England, because I'm doing a lot of training for them, was saying, oh, we should get the BBC to do something about it. And then virtually the next day there was this. It was fantastic. So yeah, anyway, I do recommend that. Even if you're not really into the Archers, you might have to go back a couple of episodes to get the context, but they're very short. Anyway, I'll be quiet now, but thank you for that.
Oh, I love that. The Archers always makes me think of cooking Christmas dinner with my mum. She would always have it on. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources as well. That's really great. And I know that GEM Northeast, for anyone who's northeast of England or kind of southern central Scotland, they had a session a couple of months back on kind of climate engagement, and they're doing a follow-up online session in the next few weeks, which I don't know if it's been advertised yet, but if you're signed up to GEM, keep an eye out. It's on its way. Fab, I think Sue, you were next.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I'm already booked onto the GEM course. That's brilliant. Mine's sort of linked to what Caroline was saying. I look after an 18th century thatched cottage, And I've been really keen to do something about how that cottage was used and built and how that transfers to the modern times. So how the peat and the lime wash and the crooks, obviously, all of the different aspects of how the cottage functions. And the bit I'm struggling with is how to get from that information about how it was used to how that informs people today about, you know, where the thatch came from, etc. So that's sort of where I'm looking for tips about how I can develop programs. We did apply for a grant to try and do it, but we were unsuccessful, unfortunately, and we're all volunteers. So it's trying to see how we can use the building.
That sounds fascinating, Sue. Thank you. If anyone is working on anything similar, feel free to absolutely jump in. I wonder if, I don't know where your thatch is sourced from, but I wonder if there's a way of speaking to kind of the place that it's sourced and see who they work with, and if they can put you in touch with kind of like modern, like retrofitting or home thatch kind of groups as well. The RSPB are doing some work at the moment on the Tay reed beds, so central East Scotland, kind of between Dundee and Perth, for anyone who's not familiar with up here. So the Tay reed beds used to provide a huge amount of thatch for all over the UK, and they're now only harvested for the Crannog Centre. The Crannog Centre have an agreement with Tay reed beds, and the RSPB are kind of doing some work with the Crannog Centre around that and kind of how it was harvested, why it was planted, when it was planted. So the reed beds were originally put there by monks who wanted to thatch the monastery. So it might be worth kind of looking into that a little bit as well and seeing if there's a local kind of nature-based organisation where the reeds or whatever material is local for your thatch are harvested, and see if they can help at all. But anyone else who's done similar, please do jump in, because thatch is not my area of expertise. I just find it fascinating.
I was going to say my ears always prick up at thatching, because we're a pair of early 19th century heather thatched cottages, which are going to be rethatched as part of our redevelopment. And the two things we're doing to try and communicate some level of climate integration with that is, one, the extension building we're putting adjacent to it will have big areas of sedum roof to attenuate rainwater and give some natural insulation. So we're drawing that very obvious parallel. But also we're able to talk about the wider impact of our interventions with the local area. So being a thatched cottage, obviously it would have been at one point a plentiful local material. When the cottages were rethatched in the 1990s, it was possible to pull the heather from just across the loch. In fact, it was brought over by an old rowing boat as part of a very Arthur Ransom type publicity stunt. But now, because of changes in just how land is used and more intensively cropped, even in the Highlands, our heather has to be brought from over 100 miles away now, because it's the only place where heather grows to the sufficient length. So we're able to just very basically touch on these stories about how what was a very plentiful, abundant building material has noticeably deteriorated in availability even in the last 20-30 years. So any story like that we really like to latch onto.
See, this is why I love groups like this, because these connections just happen. I love that. Just thinking as well on a couple of things people have said so far. There's some really interesting work happening with Highland Folk Museum. So Newton Moor, kind of near-ish Aviemore, if you've seen it on a map. And they're working with an artist from Skye who's taken some of their heather artifacts, so they've got like doormats and things, and brushes, and she's trying to backward engineer how they were made, and working with the local traveller community as well, who still hold some of that knowledge, because all of the modern attempts to remake it haven't been nearly as strong as the kind of 150, 200-year-old one in their collection. So what they're doing is trying to, with this artist and local traveller community, backward engineer how that's done, and then they're then going to teach their costumed interpreters, who will then run workshops with the public. So I think that's a really nice example of trying to learn from the past to get these really, yeah, kind of local materials. And all the heather is gathered on site. They have quite long heather on their site. Yeah, sorry, that was just a short interlude. It just suddenly made me think of that project that I got to go and watch the artist and all her drawings the other week, and I was like, oh, fascinating. Fab. Would anyone else like to share anything they're working on? As I say, it can be minuscule, it can be big. We can come back to thatch, whatever people would like. Very much a space for you guys to share. Karen.
Sorry, I know I only raised my hand. Yes, thatch. I love thatch. I thatch a lot. I've worked a little bit with Brian Wilson, who's a heather thatcher in Scotland, who might work or have worked with Glencoe. I'm not too sure.
Brian is our thatcher, yes.
Yes. Oh, he's amazing. So he taught me everything I know, the little bit I know about heather thatching, and I'm looking forward to going, hopefully, to the Highland Folk Museum to see Hannes, who is there as well. So we've been very lucky to pull the heather for one of the buildings at the Crannock Centre on the hills just behind the centre, but it was an agreement with a local community-owned land and in respect with either the RSPB or Nature or Environment Scotland.
Yes, Nature Scot. I think they had that community deal with.
That would be it. So that's something that I'm really keen on learning more about, and that people have been interested in. Is genuinely, how do you get the materials? And that's why so many, as you were saying, the reed beds for the thatch around Perthshire on the Tay are just the only one local I know. There's not much in the UK. A lot was imported from Poland, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, etc. So there's, at the moment, in the thatching community, especially Southern England, a massive lack of skills to make the parts that are needed to repair and replace thatched roofs. So for an 18th century thatched cottage, my question would be, is it really reed thatch, or have you looked at the underside? Is there other materials that are more local, or was it thatched with something else, and so on and so forth? But I'm really glad to see so many people and so many places, at least in Scotland, who have thatch. It's now rare and it's very traditional. That's it. So hopefully we'll have workshops about how to very vernacular, very simply thatch. None of these very beautiful, complex, I'm so sorry, cottage thatches. But if you want to make one in your garden, that's something we hopefully will develop with either Historic Environment Scotland or some open air museums in the future. Would that be of interest? Sorry, I didn't even finish my sentence. As yeah, climate and local, local environment and natural resources kind of look at activity.
I think that sounds fascinating. I think there's really interesting stuff as well around how if we're using local material, how we harvest it as well. So whatever each kind of individual area is going to have, and material is going to have different harvesting cycles that are beneficial. So I think for a lot of wood, it's quite often a 7-year coppice cycle, because that allows really healthy regrowth and stuff. So I think that's an interesting area to cover around that as well. Kathy?
Sorry, I just was going to say something more about thatch before you move on, because I think that's a fantastic idea to do even more about it, and I love what Caroline's saying. I think there still are a number of reed beds in Norfolk that that supply thatch, and about 15 years ago we had a house fire and then had to have a whole of our roof re-thatched, and it was thatched from reed that was not very far away with a local thatcher, but he's now retired, and I don't know whether there's anybody replaced him as such. But also the amount of kind of people, there had just been quite a few fires of that for thatched roofs, and and the number of people that thought we were completely bonkers to have, we weren't listed, so we didn't have to go back to having thatch roof. But in the long run, it's cheaper, it's better, it's kind of got no disadvantages at all, and yet people, and also it's completely safe as long as you don't have the wrong sort of fire and that sort of thing. It's just as safe. And the thatch roof actually saved a lot of our possessions because it was the old sort that was not ventilated in the same way that modern roofs are, and therefore the fire didn't spread as much. So kind of making people aware of it and say that, you know, it's okay, and not having that fear about it, because I think that might still be around, that people just think that it's not a sort of modern material, it's not the sort of material we should have now on our houses, and people are a bit, you know, nostalgic and a bit stupid if they want it, kind of thing. So to get that, to change that attitude would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Kind of on fires, the one thing that I find really interesting, I'd be really interested to hear your take on it. There's genuinely not a wrong answer. I'd be really interested in people's take on the use of things like peat, kind of in museums that are showcasing life at a certain period of time when that was the fuel source. And I know that a lot of rural museums use peat because of its safety. So a lot of places with thatch roofs, for example, will use peat because it doesn't spark in the way that wood does. So I'd be really interested in that. Irene, you have your hand up, and I've also chatted a lot, so I'm going to pass back.
I wasn't going to talk about peat at all, just about what we're doing in our museum. You actually came and visited us over the summer.
I did, and it was so lovely. Everyone should go to Abernethy Museum. It's so lovely.
So we're a really small kind of local history museum, and we don't have a lot of inside space. But what we do have is a really nice courtyard garden. And the museum's built on the site of Chaldees College. You know, there's been a couple of different religious centres in Abernethy. So we've based our garden around a monastic herb garden. So a lot of the things that we are doing are based around medicinal use of plants. We have to use our outside space for workshops and events because we just don't have any space in the museum. So lots of things we've been doing, you know, we've been making things with clay, but we've had adults in picking their own herbs from the garden to make bath bombs, and we're just trying to do more using the space and the resource that we have. We've started putting up bird boxes and you know, just making nice use of what we've got and getting people outside and enjoying outside. And we always try and link the activities that we're doing with things that are in the museum. And a lot of that is agriculture, you know, fisheries, that sort of thing. But the next step's going to be to try and get some outside cover, even if it's temporary, so that we can, we're not stopped by the rain whenever that happens.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that on my visit, didn't we? About how, like, even just having some kind of temporary rain cover would massively open up your opportunities.
Yeah, it would be great.
I really loved as well what you were telling me on my visit, Irene, about how, like, the bath bomb making workshop, for example, with all your local herbs, actually kind of got you some new volunteers in the end because it brought in a slightly different audience. Exactly.
Yeah, it did.
And I love that.
Yeah, and the more we've kind of opened up, the more new people have been expressing interest in what the museum's doing, which is fabulous. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so good, and I think it's such a good example of how a topic like climate that people might find a little bit off-putting or not think has a place in the museum, actually, if you connect people through the nature side of climate instead, it can really broaden your audience. I think that's really nice. You talked as well in the summer about having aspirations, and I'm just desperate to know if this is going ahead because, like I said, it's fabulous, of trying to do similar, but like a gin making workshop.
Oh, we haven't organised that yet. Yeah, we're at the point now of trying to plan sort of 6 different things for next year. I think we did 4 things last year, maybe 2 the year before. We're trying to kind of ramp up. So hopefully in the next month or so, we'll have our 6 activities planned for over the season next year. So I'll make a note that you want the gin one, and we'll send you a personal invitation.
This is it. I don't even drink. I just think it sounds like a really fabulous event.
Yeah.
I'll send my mum. She's just down the road from you.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I think that's such a nice example of how you can connect people with nature in a way that they're not necessarily thinking they're coming to like a climate event. It's getting those
Yeah.
different audiences, and that broadens your audience as an organisation as well, which I love. Fab. Yeah, Kathy's right. We all want a gin invite. What else are folk up to? Someone has something in the chat. Let me scroll back up. Working on a small
Lucy,
museum
can we
storage.
go back to your...
Oh yeah, sorry, Hannah, go for it.
Sorry, that's what I was just going to say. Can we go back to your peat question? I don't, as I say, I don't know the answer either. But that whole thing of if you're looking at the historical integrity of whether the smell of burning peat as well as the burning of it, but equally museums that have ranges fueled by coal and it's of that era, you know, where does that lie in terms of actually doing it and having a negative impact on the climate, but being able to talk about why it's a negative impact, and does that then offset? I don't know the answer, but again, interesting to know whether people have had that similar challenge, and you know, the fact that you can't burn coal anymore, you know, e-coal, does that, you know, do museums then use that or something similar, or have they moved away, and has anyone had that problem?
I love to start a group discussion with a controversial question. For e-coal, I know that the Scottish Railway Museum of Scottish Railways, their preservation railway has actually been testing out e-coal to see what works and what doesn't. Not as efficient as actual coal. It did work. Must be stored in a very dry and airtight space because it will disintegrate if it gets wet. And it turns out the local mice found it the perfect winter home, so they ate quite a lot of it. But I think that's a really nice example of a museum being able to test that kind of material. Alex?
Hi, I know that the Black Country Living History Museum, they were also testing different sorts of e-coal last year, and we went there, and in there kind of where they make nails and like the foundry areas, but the person who was kind of in there doing the interpretation and making the nails, she had to be waiting outside because they had problems with it causing too much carbon monoxide, and meaning that they couldn't actually then be in the space, despite it being quite open as well. But they're doing lots of testing into kind of more sustainable fuels to use.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, especially when we're able to kind of put interpretation around that and talk to visitors about the fact that museums are playing that role as well, I think it really centres the importance of our sector in this conversation. Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I don't think there is a right answer. I think an argument in favour of using things like peat is definitely, as well as kind of the safety aspect of it not sparking, but is that it opens us up for then having those conversations with the public about, oh, what is peat? How does peat grow? You know, what is the biodiversity and the ecosystems around peat? How can we protect it? What organisations are there locally that you can find out a bit more, or you can protect it? So I think, yeah, it's definitely a balance as kind of, yeah, does the good outweigh the bad? And I think there's absolutely not a right answer at this point. Yeah, it's just something I find quite fascinating as a conversation. And then I know there's some museums out there that have a huge amount of peat on their land. You know, they have peat bogs on site. I think I saw Adrian from National Museums of Northern Ireland pop up earlier, and I know that they've got some peat on their land as well. Yes, definitely coal and peat conundrums for sure. Any other projects or comments on that? What do folk think? Or on anything you're working on at all as well. It doesn't have to be fuel related. No? Okay, that's absolutely fine. We're going to move on to my next question in that case, which is, what's stopping you doing more? What barriers do you feel you were currently facing as a sector or in your local area? I know planning bylaws could be an absolute nightmare. Irene, you and I have talked about this a lot. So yeah, what barriers are you guys currently facing? And can any of us help each other kind of overcome them a little bit? And it's totally okay. This is a very safe space to say my barriers are my colleagues. That's okay at this point.
I wasn't necessarily able to say that properly when you visited. But yes.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think there's definitely people who perhaps don't see museums as the appropriate place to have those conversations. See it as, oh, we've got too many other things to talk about. Like, we need to be talking about people and place, or we need to now be talking about intangible cultural heritage, and we need to be talking about colonial legacies, and we need to be talking about all these different things, whilst we know that our staff capacity and our volunteer capacity is getting increasingly stretched. So
capacity is our problem.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Volunteer run and just
yeah.
Volunteer run.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I really like to stress climate doesn't have to be something new. You can absolutely build it into pre-existing projects on different things. So I know a few places who are running projects at the moment with local traveller communities, or looking at the colonial legacy and how that's impacted Indigenous knowledge. Those are all climate related issues. That is, the historic devaluing of traditional knowledge is a really interesting route in talking about climate. Without having to make a climate programme, you can just add 2 or 3 sentences into a pre-existing, presentation, tour, sign, all of those things. Caroline, your hand is up, and then I've got a couple of things in the chat I'll bring out as
well. Yes, that's super interesting. My personal limitations are to go across different disciplines. So cross-disciplinarity, I'm learning with this thing, because I have to have a foot in the building, natural, at least sustainable building industry, who is not at all aware of archaeology or what even an open-air museum is. And if I talk to museums, especially if they are not site museums, but just museums with collections, say National Museum Scotland, for example, it's very difficult to get them to think that maybe the building and construction is related or can be related to their own collections, and is also something very important in the climate crisis solution finding. So it's really difficult to have conversations with people about different themes that all come together without being taken for a hippie, usually, when you start saying, well, I build with earth. Even in building conservation, it's very much on the side of it. And weirdly enough, it's archaeological open-air museums so far, as well as historic open-air museums, have been the ones who actually managed to do all of this between collections, archaeology or history, and built environment. Haven't found better, but I don't know how that could be done better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Really interesting. And I think it definitely says something about the fact that open air museums and rural museums are doing this better than a lot of urban museums. I think it really says something about the connection between climate and place. And rural museums are so much more connected to place than a lot of our urban museums are. And that's an amazing starting point for rural museums. You know, it's our understanding of where we come from, or where we've chosen to live, or where we've ended up, and what that landscape, how that landscape impacts on our life, and how that then kind of is how we interact with the landscape as well. So yeah, I think that's a fascinating kind of conversation. I do have something else to say on that, and it's totally slipped my mind. If it comes back to me, I will come back to it. A couple of things in the chat as well that are really relevant to this as well. The view that it's just natural history collections, that's all climate is. Completely get that. Oh, I don't have a natural history collection in my museum, therefore it's not relevant. I would very much take the approach, and this is how my career came into existence, sneaky climate. Same principle as sneaky maths in your learning program to get some curriculum points. It's about taking a topic that you're going to do anyway, that you know goes down well with the board, or with other members of your team, or with teachers that book visits to you, and just starting to put little hints and bits about nature in there. So you might be walking across the site, and you might ask the kids in your tour group just to take a minute, just to take a breather, because we all know a little tiny bit of mindfulness can massively improve a workshop. So just take a breather. What can you hear? Oh, I can hear birds. Oh, I can hear the leaves rustling. Oh, I can hear the crunch of pine cones under my feet. Little tiny things like that just get an audience thinking about nature as just something that they experience every day. And just sneaking it in there. Sneaky climate. And it hugely overlaps with any kind of colonial legacies work that anyone might be doing as well. The impact on biodiversity as a result of specifically British Empire, but others were as bad, and kind of the enslavement of a lot of different people, the creation of plantations, all of these things, as well as having catastrophic human impact, had a big impact on the biodiversity that's still being felt by those communities today. So that's a really interesting route into it as well. And if you're still really struggling to get senior management or board kind of buy-in, I love a risk register. It's quite boring, but a risk register is a great way of being like, by not doing these things, this is what we face. We face really bad storm damage. We face a lack of financial resilience when the place floods. We face losing kind of reputational, no, you don't lose reputational damage, that'd be good. Suffering reputational damage because we're not talking about these issues that we know the public want to be talking about. There's been a couple of surveys in recent years. I can try and dig them out and ask David and Hannah to send them around. The public expects museums to be talking about this now. The public expects us to be a source of knowledge on this and to hold those baselines. So shifting baseline syndrome is a huge issue in understanding the natural world. So, oh, I heard a bird today. That's nice. My great-grandmother wouldn't have been able to think for the noise of the birds if she lived in this area 100 years ago. So shifting baseline is huge, and museums have that data because we have diary entries or paintings or natural science collections from all the way back. Yeah, so I think I love a risk register. It's not shiny, it's not sexy, but board members also love them, so it can be a good way to win people round. Oh, there's so much in the chat as well, so I'm gonna shut up and let you guys. Oh, okay. It was too long a silence, and I don't do silences, so I'm going to keep talking, but cut me off. Someone popped in the chat, is it okay for museums to work with climate activists? Absolutely. Again, you are going to have to win over your board on this, but that's okay. Climate activists are coming to museums, whether or not we invite them. It's hitting the urban museums more so than the rural ones at the moment, but they're coming for you. If you have objects of national importance, climate activists are going to start coming and engaging with you around those things. So it's considerably safer to invite them in, to open that conversation, to host banner making workshops with them, to let them do IPCC readings, to do all of these different things. Obviously, you're going to want to choose who you work with really carefully. You're going to want some pretty strong kind of agreements and checks and things in place. But absolutely, museums should be working with climate activists because, yeah, they're going to engage with you regardless. So it's much better to do it on your terms. Would be my personal take. And yeah, there's a few resources been shared there about that too. Oh, I love fishing diaries. That's fascinating. See how fish stocks have changed over time as well. Amazing. Oh, Duke of Edinburgh Climate Ambassador. That's a fantastic role, Kathy. And yeah,
sorry,
really
it's not Duke of Edinburgh. It's that's
not,
DFE.
sorry.
But I'm forgetting because education is devolved in Scotland.
Oh yes, sorry. So yes,
it's
even
Department for
better.
Education. But I know Scotland's way ahead on that anyway. I mean, you have SDGs in all your stuff and everything. You know, we all know that.
We try.
But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point though. The SDGs are a really good way to engage. So increasingly schools, definitely in Scotland, but it's happening more across all home nations. And if you get international education groups as well, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a really great way to engage groups and to win people round to being like, oh, if I go and do that workshop or I do that tour or I pick up that trail, we will hit SDG, bum, 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 bum. There's 3 SDGs that are very specifically worded to be about climate. I would say all of them can actually relate to climate though. So they're well worth taking a look at as well. Oh, weather diaries. I love that, Irene. That's great. That's fab. Oh, and climate heroes from the past and the future. I like that as well. That's really nice. Really nice. Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm going to move us on because I'm well aware that it's almost 4 o'clock on a Thursday, so I'm not going to take up all of your afternoon. So I'll move us on really quickly. I'll just share some resources that we've got available and that other places have as well. And then we'll open up to kind of a more general Q&A, but I will also share my details and please do just get in touch. It's nice to meet folk. Feel free to get in touch. So I think we want this one here. Hopefully that is my slides resharing. Yeah, lovely. The next question is there a button that lets me move the slides? Is that reshared? There it is. Lovely. So before we wrap up, we've got lots of lovely resources that we can share with you. Oh, there we go, sorry. This is a couple of Museum Galleries Scotland's resources specifically. Whilst our funding is specifically for Scottish accredited museums, our resources are free and they're for everybody, so please do use them. We've got advice guides, blogs, case studies. Our newsletter also has a lot of climate stuff in it. Our November Focus On, so each month we do a newsletter called Focus On, which is about a specific thing in our strategy. November's is going to be all about climate. So do feel free to sign up to that. You can sign up just on our website. All of these resources are freely accessible. We also host the Scottish Museums Climate Network. It's a meeting-free network because nobody has time for constant meetings. It's for anybody working or volunteering in museums, galleries, and heritage with an interest in climate. The content on it is going to be heavily Scottish, but you're still welcome to join, even if you're not based up here. If you would like to join Scottish Museums Climate Network, It's a space for us to share opportunities, challenges, just a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today. Just drop me an email. Unfortunately, I can't share a joining link because it's hosted on Teams by us. Our security doesn't let me just put out a link. But if you'd like to join, my email address will be on screen in just a second. It's also worth mentioning amazing resources from the following places. The Museums Association, they now have a climate justice steering group and they're putting out really interesting resources. The Exhibition Group is a group specifically looking at the climate impact of putting on exhibitions and touring. Gallery Climate Coalition has a lot of really interesting stuff as well, as does Julie's Bicycles, as does Climate Museums UK, as does GEM. All your usual museum-y places will have climate content. Just give them a bit of a dig. And if you can't find it, drop them an email and ask them why they don't have climate content, because they should. So that is pretty much everything from me today. But like I say, I'm more than happy to stick around if anyone has any questions at all. I hope you find it useful. Please do reach out anytime. You can get me on Lucy N for Neville at museumsgalleriesscotland.org.uk. Or if you forget my name, you can just email climate@museumsgalleriesscotland.org.uk and that will get me as well. And that is a QR code that will take to my LinkedIn as well if there's anything you want to ask me there too. So I will leave that up for a few minutes, but in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, on you go.
Thank you, Lucy and all. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I've been making notes like Billio. I suppose my question is more about the future and what we can do about some of the effects of climate change on our own organisation. So we are undergoing a big redevelopment, and we are doing everything we can to mitigate our impact on the climate. So we're having solar panels, air source heat pump, organic roof, more green spaces, e-bike chargers. We're not promoting, car visits. We're promoting more sustainable tourism. But also, we've noticed in the last couple of weeks that when it's rained and the lock has flooded, it's coming a little bit further up the street than it used to. So, and there's not a lot we can do about that as part of the immediate project. So the question is, what can we do to mitigate? Just in the most general terms, who can we be talking to now? What can we be looking at? What can we be starting to put in place to mitigate the effects of climate change on us that are kind of otherwise out of our control?
Good question, David. Oh, I am a huge fan of nature-based solutions. So working with your local landowners, be that kind of private landowners or people like Nature Scot, Forestry Land Scotland, the equivalents in the other home nations. My apologies, I really don't get out of here very often. I would be speaking to a lot of them to kind of look at nature-based solutions. So things like rain gardens that can absorb massive amounts of water. Willows in particular as a plant. I would recommend all museums that have a flooding issue plant willow. Willow drinks a crazy amount of water, to the extent that it's recommended you not plant it near a building because it will send roots into your sewers to get more water. But it also grows very, very fast and is an incredible building material. So lots of museums, the Sterling Smith does kind of willow weaving workshops and things, which are really nice income generators as well. You can make things, for selling in shops, working with local artists, all these different things. But its primary function is it will drink a huge amount of water. And it's a very light tree as well, so it doesn't cause much damage when it comes down as well. The Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, and I'm sure others are doing very similar, it's just my local one, are doing some really interesting research at the moment around native plants and plants that might become naturalized in Scotland as a result of climate change, that can absorb huge amounts of water, that can stabilize soil, things like that. Kathy's also right. We're just going to have to accept that we might flood at certain times of the year and adapt to what is in certain parts of our building, what is near doors, what can be moved, are the floors that can easily be mopped, cleaned, all of these things as well. And lobbying, it's a boring one, but it's super important. So speak to ourselves at Museums Galleries Scotland, speak to the Museums Association. India Diver is fantastic there. We have really regular conversations with government about the need for mitigation and adaptation and all of these things. And Kathy's right, beavers. If you can get beavers, get beavers. They're brilliant. They'll flood the stuff that's meant to flood. They'll keep the stuff that's meant to stay dry. Beavers, I get so excited about like.
Well, I've not budgeted for beavers, but I can revisit things. Is that something MGS would be prepared to fund, do you think?
I mean, it's an application I'd love to read. I can't promise I could give you money off the back of it, but I'd love to read it. But it's definitely the kind of thing you could work with local landowners, organizations like Wildlands as well, like rewilding organizations, and the RSPB, who have the ability to do things like that and to sort licenses and all of that kind of thing. They're worth speaking to as well.
Thanks, that's really useful. I mean, that is we have suffered annually with flooding in our current form, because the road outside the museum cottages has been paved and paved and paved over the years, so the road surface is now nearly a foot above the museum door, and there aren't any drains. So every time it rains, we have to get the sandbags out. So one of the things we're doing through our redevelopment is putting massive drains out the front and green spaces, because it is currently just all tarmac. But I guess what I'm thinking more the kind of biblical weather further down the road. But your suggestion is really useful. Thank you everyone for that.
No worries at all. I've just popped in the chat as well, for anyone particularly interested in flooding in museums. There's a brand new exhibition that opens tomorrow in Perth. The team have done an amazing job on it and are happy to chat to people about it as well. So even if you're not in Central Belt Scotland, do drop them a line. Perth Museum open Waters Rising tomorrow. It's about the history and the culture of floods in one room, and then the other room is all about climate action and climate activism, and local stories around flooding. It's fascinating. Two of my favourite objects that are in it is a waterproof case that was built for the Quran that was held in their archives, and a taxidermy crocodile head that, when the museum basement flooded and the fire department went in to help with pumping the water out a few weeks later, they just saw this crocodile head floating in the water, and they all sprinted out the door because they were convinced that there was a crocodile loose in the museum. So some fabulous little stories in that exhibition. It's well worth a look. It opens tomorrow. It's really good. Any other questions? I'm aware it's after 4 o'clock, so if anyone has to leave, that's totally okay. I'm not easily offended. No, that's lovely in that case. You've all got my details. Do please feel free just to get in touch if you suddenly think of something you wish you'd ask. And the most important thing about climate action is realizing you're not the only ones doing something about it. And you're not. You're all in this room today, which proves that you're not the only ones thinking about this. We are all working together on this. And whilst it might not always feel like it, with interesting things happening in the world this week, small actions do make a massive difference. And if every museum in the UK inspires even only 5 visitors over the course of a year, we will genuinely change how society thinks about climate. So we do have a massive role to play, and each and every one of you, is capable of making big change, even if it feels like it's small to start with.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Lucy. I think you've given us an awful lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll have to have a follow-up session at some point to talk about where we've all got to. Thank you very much everyone for coming, and if you've not joined the Rural Museums Network, we won't inquire as to why not, but we do recommend you visit our website and have a look. And I'm sure this is the point where I'm meant to share details of our next event, but I don't have them up, so I just to show that there will be future events, and look at the website. Thank you very much everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye.